Hello, everybody. It is so wonderful to see all of you again. All right, guys, let's settle down, please. After the biggest trauma I've ever experienced as a faculty member all these years, so welcome back. I hope you all are safe and healthy and well. I hope you all are tuned in to all the ways that Sonoma State University is wanting to support you. Like, there's a lot of ways. Hope you all are aware of the group effort to show gratitude to those who worked very hard to save our campus. There's a gathering at 5 o'clock, and I think the Seawolf Plaza, right? So welcome back, indeed. Couple of announcements. First of all, we were going to go to Chinatown. Was it this weekend or last weekend? Was it this weekend? Anyway, it's been canceled. For next term, we will do it. It's a great trip. Please just keep your eye on it. I want to also invite you. I've invited your seminar faculty to please urge you to attend a meeting that supports Sonoma State University's accreditation. It's Tuesday. I'll send out a note about this. I'll make sure that your faculty can spread the word to. Is next Tuesday at 2 o'clock for just 45 minutes. You're meeting with an outside accrediting agency to talk about this program or other programs that make Sonoma State University distinctive. Just keep your eyes open for that. There is a roundtable today. And I think that's all the announcements. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce to you one of my best friends, one of my most esteemed colleagues on campus. I've talked with many students who say things like, "Wow, that professor changed my life." No faculty have I heard that more about than Don Romesburg. So if you want an amazing experience, please take one of his classes in the future. He is a professor in our Women's and Gender Studies department. His PhD is from Berkeley. He has his MA from the University of Colorado Boulder. He's a historian. So he can tell you a great deal about history. In fact, one of the neatest things that he's doing right now is he's championing efforts statewide to integrate LGBTQ history into the California state curriculum. We're continuing our inquiry into identity. I think today we're talking about gender identity, and I have in my mind, in my heart right now, that there are some aspects of identity that predispose people to violence and cruelty. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. Professor Don Romesburg.
I can't possibly match up to that introduction. Thanks. I'm going to make this make as much noise as possible. Okay, good? Yeah? Okay, here we go. Welcome back to campus. For how many of you is this your first class back since everything? Yeah, okay. So just to hold that space for everybody, to know that we're all showing up here from really different places, and we're all coming to it from different experiences with different feelings going into it. So I just urge all of you to reach out for the support that you need. I urge all of you also to be extra double compassionate to everyone around you over the next couple of weeks as everybody's making sense of sort of how to move forward. I live in San Francisco, so my experience of this was a lot of stuff on social media and a lot of smoke, but not a personal sense of impact. And so I'm keenly aware that I come to it from a very different place than some of you who have been much more closely touched by it. So anyway, I just want to say my heart is with all of you who are most deeply touched, and that I know all of us experience it in particular ways. And I think I speak for many faculty and staff when we say that we stand with you, we are here for you, and we'll help connect you to whatever you need to be connected to get the support and care that you need. So I just want to start with that. And then talk about another potentially heavy issue. I'm going to talk a little bit about masculinity and about the, is this super loud? It feels crazy loud from here. Okay, I'm a loud talker, so. To kind of unpack some of the ways in which masculinity operates in our society, and then the ways in which we sort of, we live through different kinds of expectations of masculinity as both men and women in our society, and particularly as young men and women. Before I get to that, I want to point out some handy things that I've done for you. I'm a former FYE teacher, and so I've put places where when you're writing your papers, right? Look, okay, right? You're going to have like, there's the ethos, right? It's right here, right? This is why I can be talking about this. I'm a women and gender studies professor. So anyway, you'll see those throughout the slides, so keep that in mind. Before we jump right into my talk, though, I want to look at these three images here. And in what ways do they speak to masculinity? What jumps out to you about them? What stories do they tell? Are you a quiet year of FYE as opposed to a talky year? You have the quiet years and the talky years in these full class discussions? Okay, we'll do this then. I'm really flexible. Turn to the person next to you and spend 30 seconds talking about which image jumps out most to you and what is it about the image that jumps out to you. All right, thanks. All right, so who had a partner who talked about the first image? And what did they say?
She said that they were playing a game to see who was better.
Okay, all right, so there's something potentially there, right? Definitely some sort of bro-y game that involves some, I don't even know what's in there, right? Okay. Who had a partner who talked about the second image? So who had a partner that talked about the third image? All right. So what is it about the third image that stands out for those of you who raised your hands? Yes? That he's got the word penis on his forehead, right? Clearly, right, what's the story of this image? What's happening here? Yes. He fell asleep at a party and right, so he can't hang, right? Meaning that he's not able to drink and not pass out, right? Drink to excess and not pass out. Yes? Okay, and so the punishment / fun, right, of this moment for this guy, right, is that you then draw a dick on his face, right, penis across the top, make him have a unibrow, right, and I think the word is whore on the other side. I think that's what that word is there, probably whore, right? So what's ostensibly funny about this? Like, what is the humor that resides in this? What's funny about it? Whether or not you think it's funny, what's funny about it? Yes? Okay, so one thing that's just hilarious about this is that he did not consent to it, but it happened to him, right? So that's funny. Okay, what else is ostensibly funny about this? Yes? okay, no one's going to know that he's a cock whore, or he's not going to know that he's a cock whore when he's talking to his friends, and so that's hilarious, right? Okay, now you could have drawn like a kitten or a heart or a rainbow or a sandwich. There's a lot of things you could have put in this image. So what is ostensibly funny about putting a penis next to his mouth? Yes, go ahead. It's obnoxious. Okay, I certainly feel so, but why is it obnoxious? Yes, I'm sorry. Either one of you, it doesn't matter to me. They're making fun of his sexuality, right? I think we can probably guess that he's not self-identified as openly gay or bisexual, that probably the humor that resides in this is not trying to instantiate some kind of hate crime against him, right? I certainly hope that's not what this is. I just wrote frat boy passed out drunk into Google a few years back and did an image search, and this came up, right? So the humor that resides in this then is that A, it's humiliating to be a guy who can't hold his liquor. B, it's humiliating to be a faggot, right? C, if you are someone who has a guy who doesn't keep control of themselves, even though you're supposed to be encouraged to drink to excess, that lack of control should lead to some sort of joking behavior or pranking behavior, right? And that D, the cost of this behavior comes to the individual in terms of their personal humiliation at the satisfaction of the larger male peer group, right? But that also it's a way of denigrating LGBT people or people who have same-sex attractions or desires or identifications, right? That's the joke, right? So good, right? So good. So I start here because I want us to be thinking about what is it that we're socialized into as guys? What are the things that we are trained to do to one another to preserve the notion of what masculinity is supposed to be? What are some of the techniques that we use to engage in that kind of management of peer masculinity, right? But also to think about, right, with the book that you read, right, All American Boy, right? There's ways, wait, American Born Chinese. A, B, C, right, okay. Sorry. The way in which he's grappling with these questions of masculinity and of racialization, right, and what it means to be a desirable guy in America, and questions of sort of how to gain proximity to whiteness as a way of gaining proximity to masculinity as one grows up, right? And so we have these other guys over here who are more or less unmarked by their masculinity. What do I mean by that? I mean, they look like bros, they're good guys, right? They're just kind of hanging out, right? So we don't think about masculinity when we think about them, because for them, at least in this story, in this moment, right? I don't know, right? In this moment, masculinity just sort of resides within them. It's as if they came to the party of masculinity and they were already invited, right? But even for guys like these two guys, masculinity is something that they have to continuously work on in order to show their proximity to its norms. One slip up, and they're outside of it, right? So even those who are most close to the norms of expectations of masculinity have to constantly sort of be performing it ceaselessly, obsessively, in order to show that they naturally belong with it. Okay, what do I mean by all this? This all seems so academic. Okay, so let's get going here. So here's what I'm going to be arguing. And look, oh my gosh, it's at least 2 points of your paper, right? What I'm arguing today is that women's and gender studies is a really, really great tool for understanding how our society works and how we work in relationship to our society. It's interdisciplinary, meaning that it looks through many different fields to explore that. And it's really important for how we understand masculinity. And if we understand masculinity, we can think about how we both reject its most toxic effects, the most harmful effects it has for all of us, And we can think about how we can create a different world once we're conscious of this, once we're aware of it. And so the question ultimately becomes, and I'm using this in an intentionally provocative and derogative way, right? Are you going to be toxic masculinity's bitch? And you have to kind of decide that for yourself. So what do I mean by all that? That seems pretty brutal, right? Okay, so you should all have this PowerPoint in your FYE Moodle site, meta site, I think. But so I'm not going to click through to this, but if you click through up there, it would show you the homepage for Women and Gender Studies. Women and Gender Studies is an interdisciplinary field where we study the way that gender in relationship to things like race and class and sexuality and ability, how gender affects everything from our most innermost sense of ourselves to the broadest structures and systems of our society. Women's and gender studies also, unlike other fields, does not claim the guise of objectivity. That is to say, we do not believe in knowledge for knowledge's sake. We believe in knowledge for the purpose of making more lives livable, making a place where more people can exist in their fullness and in their potential. And that's why we produce knowledge, that's why we teach, that's why we do the scholarship we do. That's the function of it in the world. One of the things that Women's and Gender Studies traditionally has done is to look at men and masculinity through the lens of the concept of patriarchy or male privilege. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to move to something else. So I like this, Tatsuya Ishida did this great cartoon a few years back about patriarchy that's based on the Matrix. Do you still have that first talk where it references the Matrix and the red pill and all that? Okay, good. Okay, so here we have this young woman. Suddenly, she gets up from her computer. She's starting to see all the coding structure that's going into the development of the reality, the augmented, the social reality that she's living in, right? She's like, oh my God, it's everywhere. And then someone comes up, on her three-wheel, and it's like, this is the patriarchy, a social interactive construct that bombards us with misogyny. What's misogyny? Does anyone know what misogyny is? Is misogyny like, oh, it's so nice to have a misogyny, like just a self-care day, I'm going to go get misogyny? No? So misogyny is antipathy towards or hatred towards or hostility towards women, right? Not just as individuals, but as a group. And so this hatred or this disgust or this cruelty or this dismissiveness towards women is part of the way in which patriarchy operates as a system, a gendered system of society that privileges men over women, right? So we might think, we're way past that, right? We're way past that kind of society. That's the society from like the early 20th century or something, right? So I just want to do a little exercise here to think about whether male privilege still exists today, okay? So by a show of hands, how many of you guys, when you walk through parking lots on campus at night, how many of you feel unsafe? Guys. Okay, thank you for saying that. How many of you women, when walking across campus at night, parking lots, feel unsafe? Raise your hand. Guys, look around. That's male privilege, right? That means that when women walk through life, they are trained from a very young age to feel imperiled, to feel like they should protect themselves, to feel like they have to watch out. That's something that most of us as men do not go through on a regular basis. right? Now, certainly if you're a man of color, you're going to be much more attentive to that. If you're somebody who's undocumented, you're certainly going to be aware of that, right? There's many ways in which it operates differently for different guys. But in general, male privilege is a real thing in all sorts of ways in our society. That's one tiny example of it. It keeps men and women in this sense of alienation from each other. And so she says, right, the big real girl says, sometimes people get so immersed in it, all of us do, that we collude in it. That is to say, we contribute to it, we participate in it in unthinking, unconscious ways, or maybe in thinking and conscious ways. And so the girl's really, wait a second, am I a colluder? And she's like, yeah, everybody is. But now you're awake, now you can see, right? Once you understand the existence of it, it's your choice whether or not you do something about it. Okay, so masculinity studies is an offshoot from women's and gender studies and sociology and history and literature, film studies. And it's a way of looking at masculine gender and gendered operations of power through multiple lenses here. So first things you need to understand about Masculinity 101 is that we don't have genders, we do genders. What do I mean by that? I mean that we are not born into the gender that we possess, and then we just live it out throughout our life, and in every context, in every circumstance, it's exactly the same, and it comes from this inner core of us. Rather, there are all sorts of ways, there are all sorts of social cues out there for how gender is supposed to work, and then we have to lean into or push away from those cues in order to be seen by ourselves and others as doing gender either well or not so well. So that's kind of a core sociological concept, right? That we don't have a gender, we don't have gender, we do gender. I'll give you a concrete example of that, though. So I'm gay, surprise. When I was in high school, I wasn't sure I was gay yet. I was like kind of fooling around with guys sometimes, but you know, wasn't totally sure about this yet. So, and it was Juneau, Alaska. So I was like, okay, so I want everyone to certainly not think of me as gay, regardless of whether or not I figure out that I'm gay. I just don't want people to think that about me, right? I would watch sort of this, in Juneau, the stoner jocks were really kind of the like creme de la creme of normative masculinity, right? So I would like watch how the stoner jocks walked, right? And I was like, okay, right. So they put their shoulders back, their hips kind of go slightly forward, right? Their head's always kind of up like this, and they walk like this. Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? Yeah. So I realized, like, if I walked like this and I lowered my voice just a little bit, and I just sort of didn't care so much about things when I talked to people, right, then I could totally pass as, like, cisgender. Okay, so that's doing gender, right? As I got older and realized who wants to hold their body like that or talk like that, and I'm gay, I realized that there's all this other ways you can move your body. Right? Your wrists articulate, right? Most human beings have articulated wrists, right? So I can actually talk like this, I can express myself, I can do whatever I want, right? And when I realized that, right, it was so freeing from this confining notion of how to do gender, and I was still doing gender, right? And I was doing it in some ways that would mark me as gay, and certainly sometimes people responded negatively to that, and have, right? But I was still doing gender, and it was really something that was freeing for me, realizing there were many ways to do gender. So gender is both intentional and scripted, right? The things that you mean to do, and the things that you are already arriving on the scene and the rules are set up for you, and you have to figure out how you're navigating them. As I said before, it's a series of ceaseless acts that you have to play over and over again. And you also have to express allegiances to normative forms of masculinity in order to be recognized by them. So you don't just have to act like normative forms of masculinity or dominant forms of masculinity. You also have to have others respond to that, right? So you have to express allegiances to it. And that's how your social gender identity gets created. Finally, all these codes and rules around gender, they circulate through ideologies, institutions, and interpersonal relations. And then we internalize those as if they are coming from inside us. Right? So there's all of these different systems out there that are at play and interpersonal relations that are at play. And then we think, oh, this is my gender, this is me. Right? So we internalize it that way. Okay. So these are the things that we know then, once we understand that we do gender. Number one, masculinity is contingent. It's culturally contingent, it's interpersonally contingent, so it means different things in different times and places. Certain kinds of masculinity, though, it's not just a free-floating thing out there, right? Certain kinds of masculinity get privileged in certain contexts. So within the context of college, right, and in the context of a white dominant college campus, certain forms of masculinity are going to be privileged, held up to higher esteem or value than others. And we're all policed or managed through those norms. Finally, and that's a lot of words, so don't freak out. You can just write down the first part before the colon. Masculinities are multiple. So in spite of the fact that certain masculinities are privileged, and therefore the dominant forms of expectation of masculinity, the realities of masculinity are that they're expressed in multiple and diverse ways. And so you see this in the main character of American-born Chinese, where, right, he's like trying to make sense of himself in the United States as a boy, and he's trying to both fit into dominant, sort of white dominant norms of sort of high school, middle school, elementary school masculinity in the United States. And he's struggling with his friend, right, who is sort of not normative in terms of masculinity in the United States. And then he's so frustrated because he gets a girlfriend first, right? And he's like, oh, damn, what do I need to do? Right? He starts having all these fantasies about the blonde, blue-eyed version of himself. And our own masculinities are changing always and conditional on all these circumstances. They're not fixed. So it's not like I could be like, okay, great, I'm going to pump some iron and I'm going to follow all the rules of normative masculinity, and like on Thursday I finally got it right, now I'm set. I don't have to ever do anything else because I'm still going to be that from now on, right? Guess what? It's not true, right? It's ceaseless. And so, so for all of us, like, we interact with that in different ways. Okay. So this is an important one. So masculinity isn't something, if it's both constructed, right, something that we do, and it's culturally contingent or situationally contingent, then it's disciplinary, meaning that there are norms and expectations around it, and there are consequences for transgressing those norms, right? The penis guy at the beginning, right? That's masculinity is disciplinary, right? And what's that guy? So that guy wakes up, okay? Everyone's laughing, right? What does he have to do in that moment to try to restore his masculinity? What are his options at that point? Should he run out of the room crying and in shame? No? Okay. What should he do? How does he restore his proximity to masculinity after being unmanned in such a substantial way? What should he do? Yes?
He's got to pretend that he's on the joke.
Okay, right. Right, so he has to just take it like it's like he has to be like, ha ha ha, that's hilarious, you got me, and it totally doesn't bother me at all, right? How funny, right? So like in order for him to sort of move past it, right, he has to be in on the joke, which means he has to agree with the rules of the joke and be complicit in the joke, right? Same faggot marginalization going on, right? But now he has to be a part of it, right? It's disciplinary in that way. He could also try to beat people up. That would be one way to do it. He could be like, ooh, I'm going to get you back. And he could be joking when he does the same thing to a friend of his later, right? Those are all masculine restoratives. We'll talk about that in a second. So we all pass. Nobody gets to be. We all pass as genders, different genders. The one that gets positioned as if it's the normal, natural, and dominant is what we call dominant masculinity. Nobody has it, right? Nobody possesses dominant masculinity, but we all get shaped by our proximity or distance from it all the time, okay? And so because nobody can have or possess it, and because we all, men and women, and those who are outside of a male-female spectrum, right, or binary, because we're all shaped by our proximity to it, we have to navigate its demands all the time. We are all consciously and unconsciously navigating the demands of dominant masculinity throughout our day, throughout our life. Another thing important from masculinity studies is that multiple masculinities, right, are different in terms of the ways that they relate to dominant masculinity. So like, without making it too like everybody's in a box, Asian American masculinities operate in a very different way than African American masculinities do, but they both have to operate through certain codes and rules and expectations, and those also have to relate to the dominant expectation of masculinity. That's what multiple masculinities do, right? So in terms of sociology, they always have to sort of speak through the demands of the dominant form. So masculinity can be exercised in all sorts of ways. One of the things that early stage masculinity studies did was really by talking about patriarchy and male privilege, it flattened the story of masculinity into saying sort of men do patriarchy, men do male privilege, so men are dominant, women suffer from it, women are victimized from it, therefore women, right, need to rise up against it. Men are, and this is extremely flattening, men are therefore bad, women are therefore, right, good, or sort of the heroes of the story of gendered liberation. What we've come to appreciate is that masculinity is far more nuanced than that, right? It affects everyone. We are all disciplined by it, unevenly to be sure, right? Male privilege is a real thing, but we all struggle under it. So there are all sorts of ways in which this can play out, right? Some of the ways it can play out can be like hostile sexism, right? Grab him by the pussy, Harvey Weinstein, right? It's like we can all see that, right? And we can all know exactly what that is. Right? That is violence against women. Even if you think it's a joke, right? Oh, right, Trump was joking with Billy Bush. Hilarious, right? You can still see how that language of inciting violence or violation of women is in service of something sexist, right? Even if you say, oh, Trump was just joking, right? So we can see hostile sexism. Oftentimes, it's harder to mark benevolent sexism. Right? Benevolent sexism is that notion that men are the protectors of women, that women need protection, that men need to speak up, right, for women, that men need to be sort of the noble gentleman, right? I'm not saying that men should not treat women well, right? They should treat all people well, and they should address the issues of patriarchy and male privilege, right? And try to reduce sexual violence and harm against women, of course. But we have to think about the ways that sexism plays out in many different ways. Okay, so that all leads us then to this idea of the masculine paradox, right? So, right, when I first was doing this talk, Obama was president. I can't find a picture of Donald Trump where I feel like he's actually enacting sort of powerful manhood. So I'm still using that. Forgive me. Do we all know Superbad? Yeah, right? So here's guys who are trying their best, right, to find their way into masculinity. And that's essentially the plot of the movie, right? So, okay, so the paradox is, because of male privilege, men as a class of people, we're powerful. We have a lot more power than women do in society, structurally. We get paid more, we have more advantages, we have more opportunities, we feel safe when we walk in the dark, etc. But because none of us can be the dominant masculinity, we can't possess it, it can't be ours to keep, we as individual guys often feel powerless. And that makes us feel insecure, and it makes us feel angry, and it makes us feel betrayed, because we should be able to keep our shit together. We should be able to, what was the term you used for people who should hold their liquor? Yeah, you should be able to hang, right? I'll try to say that in as old man way as possible, right? With quotes around it, right? You should be able to hang. My 12-year-old daughter hates it when I try to use language that her and her friends are using. Right, so men often, so you're supposed to be powerful, right? But you often feel powerless. And so this can play out in all sorts of ways. One way is toward greater hostility toward women, or feminism, right? To say like, oh, feminists make men feel so shitty about themselves. Feminism is the worst. To really be free as men, we must denounce feminism. Okay, well that's a great expression of the masculine paradox. So how are we socialized then into being men? Right, this was one of the sort of great little masculine moments, great terrible masculine moments in the book, right, where, right, he's fighting here and it's, right, don't get your panties in a bunch, little pansy boy, what did you call me? Little pansy boy, what? Nothing, right? Come on, let's leave Bucktooth alone so he can enjoy Lassie. Ha ha, Bucktooth, right? So what's happening in terms of masculinity here? There's a lot of things happening, but what are some of the things that are happening in this moment? They're jockeying for position in their relationship to dominant masculinity, okay? Who's going to be closer to it? That's what's happening here, right? So the first boy makes the first strike by both calling him more like a woman or a girl, haha, gotcha, zinger, right? And a faggot, right? Boom, gotcha again. And then he comes back, right, by saying, right, I'm more masculine, whoa, I'm yelling and I'm aggressive in my response to you. And the other one cowers and then is like, okay, so now I'm going to use racism instead as my way to get into you, right, to subordinate you. Right? And the other one says, ha, I'm going to be complicit in that. So I'm closer to the dominant masculinity. Right? That's sort of the story here. And then he ends up, right, feeling sort of, right, like he hasn't served his friend well. So masculine socialization teaches boys and young men how to have allegiance to dominant masculinity by internalizing the imperative to succeed at it, right? So we learn we're supposed to do it, and then we learn how to do it. I know there's a lot of words here. And one of the effects of this is we enact forms of toxic masculinity. And for those of you who are doing seminars, if you click on the blue links, you can click through to little YouTube clips and things that will be good discussion items for you to use in analyzing this stuff, unpacking it. To enact forms of toxic masculinity against their own well-being and that of others. Okay? Toxic masculinity is a term that's thrown around a lot on the internet and social media today, right? Essentially what we're talking about is an expression of masculinity that is violent, domineering, that needs to put down others to feel safer, to feel a sense of security, that it often encourages others to enact violence against others, and often does a great deal of self-harm to oneself. Like one of the really interesting things that came out of studies around college drinking a few years back was that the guys who are the most excessive in their binge drinking, so the ones who are doing like the heaviest drinking, where it's really like an incredibly disruptive problem in their life, they don't generally perceive themselves as drinking more than the people around them. In other words, they just think they're keeping up, right? And that's part of why they're doing it, right? They're chasing that proximity to dominant masculinity. And when you throw sort of masculinity studies into these analyses, you think about how one of the paradoxes of alcohol, binge alcohol use, and guys in college is that they do it to address the masculine paradox, right? They do it to have fun, but they do it to address the masculine paradox, right? Powerful, powerless. But then if you do it too much, penis on your head, right? You become sort of the abject, right? The abject person. So we know this, right? We know that guys who enact, which is most all of us at some point or another, who enact toxic masculinity will neglect our own health in order to demonstrate strength, right? I don't need that mask for smoke. I have a man lung, right? We express dominance through violence, right? When we get angry, violence becomes a way to restore, or the threat of violence becomes a way to restore our supremacy. We blame harms of dominant masculinity and toxic masculinity. We blame the harms of it that we are feeling or that others around us are feeling. We blame it on other things. We project it outward. We say, nope, that's about nasty women, right? That's about feminists. That's about people who read too much into it, right? That's about wimps or pussies, right? We know that men are more likely to commit violent crime than women. We also know that men are more likely to be the victims of violent crime than women, right? Because they enact this toxic masculinity. And then the key other thing about masculine socialization that we learn is that we have to engage in disciplinary actions against ourselves, right? We're not doing it well or enough, so we have to man up. Or others, right? You're being a pussy. Or you're being a bitch, right? If you're a woman, right? We have to enact it, our allegiance to it, in order to shore up our proximity to it. We learn that as part of what it means to be a guy. So we're all doing this. And I'm just gonna, I've got about, 5 minutes left? Is that right? More or less? 7. Awesome. Oh, so good. Okay. So what happens then in this, and this is all from masculinity studies, is subordinated masculinities get marked by their failure to approximate dominant or orthodox or hegemonic, whatever word you want to use, that dominant kind of masculinity, right? So gay men, men of color, genderqueer men, trans men, men with disabilities, old men, fat men, like it goes on and on and on, the kinds of masculinities that become subordinated. But also, failure gets fixed upon those that are unable to avoid their associations. Shoot, I don't have a pen, and I feel like can you give me like something? Yeah, I just need some, I have keys, but I don't want to throw them at people. Okay, and so there's a book by a sociologist named C.J. Pascoe that's called Dude, You're a Fag, came out a few years back. Essentially she talks about the high school fag discourse. It's when the heyday of "that's so gay" was sort of the phrase that you used all the time in high school, or "don't be a faggot," right? Don't be a fag. Anyway, so she talked about like you could be marked as a fag if you were liked sushi and you were a guy, or you were not, you didn't do the right thing in shop class, or whatever. There's a million reasons why. And so this is basically how it works. Okay, I'm going to throw a pen at you. Okay, all right. So watch. If you don't catch it, you're a fag. Right? Are you ready? Okay. So I just called you a fag. Okay, see, he dropped it, right? So now he's the fag. So now what is the way that you stop being the fag? How do you get rid of that? What? Catch the pen, right? But now it's too late. You're already. So how do you get rid of it? How do you get rid of it? How do you get rid of it? Give it to somebody else. That's the fag discourse. It passes on, right? Now you have it. How are you going to get rid of it? You give it to somebody else. You're not going to take it, right? Oh, masculine conflict, right? Okay, right. So, so this is what we're talking about, right? And we're laughing, and it's okay, because I'm trying to keep it light today. But this is a really real thing, right? And it both it denigrates those who are LGBTQ, but also polices all of the guys in terms of their masculinity, right? It's called the fag discourse. If you can't get away from it, it gets fixed to you. So I talked about some of the restoratives, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to put them all up right here. So these are some of the restoratives that people get, that guys get when they're trained to use. One of them is the expression of violence or honor, right? I will not be dishonored, right? You're dishonoring me. Pushing, shoving, you know, that weird thing where guys don't actually fight, but they just, right? That thing, right? But also real violence, right? Real harm. We know, for example, that transgender women, particularly transgender women of color, experience vastly disproportionate rates of violence, physical violence, murder, sexual violence, and what's called overkill, meaning someone is killed, but they are done in like graphic and horrible and brutal ways. We know that they experience these at very, very high rates, right? Vastly disproportionately. I would argue almost exclusively it's men that are doing this to them. Right? This is a violent restorative to something that they, for whatever reason, feel like they need to do. We talked about drinking. We've talked about joking in the fag discourse. Sex is a big part of it. Right? Having sex or going in the girl hunt, right? Trying to go out to the club, right? And pick up on girls, right? And this whole idea of like hate the game, not the player, right? Those are all sort of parts of this. A lot of times when, no, I'm not going to go into that for now. And then, of course, the last one is the celebration of or recognition of certain masculine roles and identities as more valid than others. So helping to assert that pecking order. Those all become ways of restoring one's proximity to normative masculinity. Okay. So a guy named Michael Kimmel studied college guys in the last decade and a half. And he's one of the leaders of masculinity studies as a field. And he says within this context of guys in their late teens, early 20s, into their mid-20s out of college, there becomes this kind of mentality that is built into the ethos of bros before hoes. Right? Bros, obviously a band of brothers, a collective, you're all more or less equal, you stand together. Hoes, a marking of women as only sex objects, as abject, as subordinate, and don't tell me chicks before dicks is the same, because it's not. You're like already being like, yay, dicks, by saying that, right? It's not the same, male privilege. So, so this sense of entitlement, this sense of silence, this sense of protection of one another is an ethos that's sewn into it. I want to get through this, sorry, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so how do we change it? Because now we are at time, right, almost. First of all, what's the first rule of Fight Club? Don't talk. I can't believe you guys still know that. So right. So the first rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club, right? Second rule of Fight Club is don't talk about Fight Club. When it comes to toxic masculinity, when it comes to dominant masculinity, when it comes to the way the masculinity works in our lives, talk about it. Tell people about this. Think about it for yourself. Talk about ways that you're navigating it. Go to the guy thing, Redefining Masculinity, talks that happen at the Hub. That's a great way to do it. Wait, I'm going to boop, boop, boop. Okay. Be accountable. Don't think you need to be a dick or a hero in order to be a guy. Think about how are the actions that you're engaging in making more lives livable or only supporting your own precarious sense of proximity to dominant masculinity. And then finally, remember, men are not the problem. Guys are not the problem. Dominant masculinity is. So the question becomes, now that you know all of this, are you going to be dominant masculinity's bitch? Okay, that's it.